Welcome to the Data Platform Geeks webinar. Today we have Anupama Natarajan doing a session on cloud-based integrations using Azure Data Factory. Before we start, I would like to quickly go through a few slides. Data Platform Geeks, which you are part of today and attending the webinar, is a subsidiary of eDomino Solutions, who also have companies like SQL Maestros and Peopleware India. They specialize in trainings across SQL Server and other technologies. Please do explore those sites so that you can get access to the content on their sites. Also, the fourth year of the conference, Data Platform Summit 2018 is announced. It's happening from 9th to 11th of August. And there are two pre-con training days on 7th and 8th. The venue is Hotel Radisson Blu, formerly Hotel Park Plaza. This is a data analytics conference and also open source, a 3-day learning event, purely learning event. We have speakers, experts traveling from all around the world, giving sessions at this conference, also networking and interacting with the people. We have MVPs, MCMs, and industry stalwarts who will be at this conference. More than 100 sessions across 7 tracks. So this will be a wonderful learning event. Let me quickly introduce you to the team behind Data Platform Geeks. Amit Bansal is the founder and president. Myself, I'm Manohar Puna, I'm the vice president. Avnish Panchal, Prince Rastogi, Sandeep Pani, Yogesh Phul, and Surbhi Agarwal are the core team members who are the pillars of this community and who run this event very successfully. Also our backbone, the eDomino teams who help us run these events across India, and also the online events like webinars. A special thanks to Microsoft, who has been a great support in helping us building this community and bringing the knowledge to the community. If you are attending the webinar today, you would have already registered on DataPlatformGeeks.com. If you haven't explored it, please try and explore, because there's a lot of free technical content available on the site, like free videos, there are labs, magazines, there are blogs, which will help you. You can also join the biggest Facebook, the largest SQL group on Facebook. You can post your questions, you can get answers, and you can answer some questions if you're interested. There is also a LinkedIn group where you can post your questions and get answers. I will quickly hand over to Anupama Natarajan, who is from New Zealand and who will be doing a session on Azure Data Factory today. Over to you, Anupama.
Great. Thanks, Manu. Hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen.
All right.
Great.
You can see it.
Great. Thanks, Manu. Great. Thanks for everyone for joining the webinar. I just realized it's a Good Friday, and being a public holiday, it's nice to have people joining for the webinar. So today, I want to talk about cloud-based integrations using Azure Data Factory. So pretty much the session is going to be based on Azure Data Factory version 2, which is currently in preview. So I'll just talk about the comparisons between version 1 as well as version 2 as we go along. But I think pretty much all the demos and everything are based on version 2. So before I kickstart the session, I just want to give you a background about myself. I'm Anupama Natarajan, so you can call me as Anu. I live in Wellington, New Zealand. And for the past 15 plus years, I have been working in the IT industry. So I currently work as a senior solutions architect at Unisys, New Zealand. So my passion is pretty much around data integration and business intelligence. It's more about, it's not just storing the data. How do we make sure the data is available to everyone, which is pretty much the right data at the right time for the right people. My expertise is around Microsoft technologies. And after this webinar, if you need to reach me for any questions or clarifications, feel free to reach me through my LinkedIn or my blog or my Twitter handle. Great. Let us get into Azure Data Factory. So the agenda for today's session is I'll introduce everyone around Azure Data Factory. We will look at what are the components that are associated with Azure Data Factory. a bit of difference between what was released as Azure Data Factory version 1 versus version 2, which is currently still in preview mode. And a couple of tools around, which is the copy data tool, so which will allow you to transfer the data either within cloud sources or from on-premises to cloud, and also like show a demonstration around lifting and shifting your on-premises SSIS packages to Azure. And the lift and shift of the SSIS packages is pretty much a key feature of ADF version 2. There is a whole heap of references that you can go back and refer to and actually practice the demos. And I have listed them at the end of the presentation, as well as I'll get the questions towards the end of the presentation and I'll answer them. Just in case if I can't answer any of the questions, feel free to reach to me through any of my channels which I have mentioned before. Great. Azure Data Factory. So pretty much Azure Data Factory is your ETL on the cloud. So Microsoft had the SSIS, which is the SQL Server Integration Services, which is still available as a product. And that was predominantly focused on doing ETL, which is around movement of the data. But with the introduction of Azure Data Factory, it's pretty much as a platform as a service. So you don't need to have anything installed or any servers in your environment. Pretty much you're doing ETL on the cloud. So Azure Data Factory is totally a managed cloud service. As I mentioned, like you don't need to have anything on your on-premises servers. So it allows you to create data-driven workflows for pretty much around orchestration and automation of data movement as well as transformation. So that's the core idea behind introducing Azure Data Factory. So if you look at the components of Azure Data Factory, so it's pretty much simple. So what is the purpose of an ETL tool? It has to connect and collect the data from the source, and it has the ability to transform the data appropriate target sources. And finally, you need to have the ability to monitor the whole life cycle. So in order to do that, pretty much I think there are 4 components within Azure Data Factory that you need to understand around data movement and data transformation. So if I start it from the left, which is the pipeline. So the pipeline is the fundamental component for the entire Azure Data Factory. So a pipeline is nothing but it consists of a series of activities. So what is activity then? So activity is nothing but a particular item which allows, or component which allows you to do data transformations as well as data movements. So pipeline is nothing but a collection of these activities. An activity can be like I want to move the data from a source table to a destination, on moving the data from that stage and target destination table. Every part of that is that's an activity. And finally, you have data sets. The data sets are nothing but your definition of your inputs and outputs. So all the way up to the schema, the data includes data type, the column names, and if you have data set, output as well as your outputs. And finally, cloud. And if you want to create a new Azure Data Factory, there are 2 options you would be presented with, whether you want to create a data factory for version 1 or version 2. So version 1 was released a few years ago, and pretty much it has got the functionality of doing ETL on the cloud. So I have a copy wizard which allows me to define my data sets, as well as to create, I can create my pipelines, and pretty much I can execute it. So that's the only thing that was available in V1. What in a nutshell it means is, if you have an existing ETL packages available or SSIS packages available on your on-premise organization, you can pretty much lift and shift it on the cloud, which that facility wasn't available in V1. In V1, basically, if you are a greenfield and if you haven't built any ETL packages, if you are thinking about building it from scratch, then ETL is a right fit for that, because pretty much you can define your ETL on the cloud. But I think, as you know, every organization have already invested their time and money and effort in developing all these SSIS packages. And I think there wasn't much attraction in terms of adoption of ADF version 1. And even in New Zealand, to be honest, like not a lot of our clients initially interested in version 1 because they had already on-premise SSIS packages. Only for new solutions where they haven't had any predefined ETL packages before, we were using ADF version 1. But I think with the release of ADF version 2, Microsoft have now completed that gap. So now ADF version 2 will allow you to lift and shift your on-premises SSIS packages, and pretty much you can run them on the cloud. I think that is opening up a wider opportunities for a lot of organizations who are just heavily invested in the infrastructure for running the ETL jobs. Now they can think about revisiting, like how can they just lift and shift these SSIS packages onto the cloud and utilize the cloud resources. So this slide is pretty much just outlining the differences between the version 1 and version 2. So I'm not going to go through them line by line here, but I'll just address some of the key things. So one of the key things which I found really interesting, which I talked about, is the lift and shift of SSIS packages. And also they have renamed the data management gateway, so which is called as DMG. So these data management gateway in version 1 pretty much helped you as a gateway to connect between on-premises SQL Server to Azure. So they have just renamed that called as integration runtime. So if you're hearing the word integration runtime, pretty much it's nothing but the data management gateway terminology that was used in version 1. So previously with version 1 also there is one version of the data management gateway, but with the version 2 there are multiple flavors of the integration runtimes, so which we'll be seeing in the subsequent slides, but just something to keep in mind. And also like in the version 1 we never had anything in terms of like how do I create a for loop or conditional activities, or how do I do expressions. So these are common things that normally you have in a SSIS ETL environment, but this wasn't available in ADF version 1. And I think Microsoft have realized that gap also, and they have tried and filled it in ADF version 2. The last one, which is pretty much a key pain point, which I had, was around scheduling. People will be thinking like, why scheduling is so complex? A lot of problems with scheduling in version 1. It's not about it couldn't do the scheduling job. It's more about trying to understand how scheduling concept works in ADF. So it is all the schedules you have to define in UTC. So which means you need to remember that. And the next thing is also like the schedule has to be set in two places. So it is not about just setting it in the pipeline. You have to set it in the data sets also, and which is sometimes like people forget. They will just set it up in the pipeline and they will go and try to execute it, and then the ETL like or ADF pipeline will not follow the particular schedule, and you'll be thinking what's going on here. Then only you will realize, oh, I forgot to set it in the data set environment. So that's something to keep in mind. In version 1, if you are changing the scheduling start dates and end dates, it has to be set in two places. While in ADF version 2, it's pretty much they have simplified that. So they have created something called like a trigger concept, where you go and set that in one place and you don't need to worry about that. And also like this UTF concept also has disappeared. So you can set your own time zone, and then pretty much you work on your time zone timings. Great. So as I said, the key thing which personally I felt that bridged the gap with ADF version 2 is around lifting and shifting of the SSIS packages. I think this one particular feature in version 2 is going to increase the adoption of ADF in all the enterprises and large organizations once it comes out of preview. And already like currently in New Zealand, we are talking to a lot of clients and starting to explore the potential opportunities that they can gain out of moving to ADF version 2. So one thing to keep in mind is it's still in preview mode. And I think when it comes out of preview, this is one feature that is going to be really highlight for any organization. Great. So before we jump into Azure Data Factory, so with Azure Data Factory, as I said, like there are two things that you can do. One is if you're working on a greenfield project, pretty much you can kickstart your ETL straight on Azure Data Factory. Or if you have an existing set of ETL SSIS packages, then pretty much you can lift and shift. So the first part of this session, we are going to focus on if it is a greenfield project and I want to build my ETL, how quickly I can do it. So we are going to use the copy data functionality in this demonstration, and let us kickstart and go on to that. I'll just quickly swap my thing to Azure. Great. So here I have got my Azure portal. So I have just got a couple of resource groups created. And within the resource groups, pretty much you can go and search, add your Azure Data Factory. So let me go on, click on add. I'll just quickly type on Azure Data Factory. Great. So you hit on create and pretty much you can set some configurations. As I said here, so this is the key one. So here it talks about version 1 and version 2 is in preview mode. So this is where you will decide on, am I going to use the features that comes as part of version 1, which is currently production ready. You can use it in your production environment. Version 2, I won't recommend straight away to use in production, and wait until it comes out of preview mode. But this version 2 has got a lot of functionality that everyone has been waiting for. So once you create the Azure Data Factory, which pretty much I'll show it in another resource group where I have kept it ready. Yeah, so here it is. I have created a Playpen Azure Data Factory. As I said, the type I have created here is version 2. And the locations, Azure Data Factory is available only certain locations in US. And it is typical like any other Azure products. Like you need to keep on looking at the locations where it will automatically, they will be just promoting these services across the different locations. And if you're really interested to know which services are available in which locations, I think check my blog, and I have got a blog post which outlines a URL which is kept up to date by Microsoft. So where you can see which services are actually getting enrolled in different locations at any point in time. So normally before I work on any project, I will just check that to make sure whether there are services which I want to utilize on Azure are available in the closest zone where I'm looking for. For us, it's more around the Australian zone. So if it is available there, that's what pretty much our preference would be. So once you have created that, pretty much you can click on your Playpen ADF, which opens your Azure Data Factory. So one thing to keep in mind is Azure Data Factory currently works on the browsers, which is Chrome and Edge. If you're trying to open that in IE, it won't open. So don't worry about that. If that's the case, make sure you either use Edge or Chrome browsers. So here, as it is displayed here, so you have multiple options, like you can create a pipeline directly or work on copy data. And I will talk about configuring SSIS integration runtime subsequently, because this is what is the key to run your SSIS packages on the cloud. And finally, you can configure your Git repository also for your ADF pipelines. So we are quickly going to look at copy data. So I hit on copy data. So this is quite quickly, you can create a pipeline just following the instructions in the wizard. So let me just quickly put on, okay, source, maybe I'll say DPG pipeline. So here you can specify, do I need to run this once or do I want to run it in a schedule? So currently I'll just keep it as run it once, because schedule I can set it up later. So hit on next. Okay, so this is the key thing to understand. So with ADF, like because this is a green field, I don't have any predefined SSIS packages I'm working here. So this gives me a whole heap of data stores that I can connect to. So this is my source data store where I need to pull the data. So if you look at pretty much all the cloud data stores are available here, and you can choose them and you can decide on where you want to pull the data from. So for this example, what I wanted to do was like, I'll just use my OData and hit on next. So here with OData, I have already got a OData service, which has got the Northwind database tables available. So I'll just copy this URL and specify this as my service URL. and specify this as my source, and just set it on anonymous authentication because this is publicly discoverable URL. So hit on next. Great. While this is happening, then the next screen is basically what it allows you to do is to select your destination. So here before it lists me all the tables where I need to pull the data from. So I'll just pick customers. So immediately I could see the preview of the data set. So this is actually coming from the service, and you can see like the output of that particular service, which is the customer's endpoint, which allows me to give me get me a list of all the customer information. So hit on next. Now I can decide what my target is going to be. So the target can be anything on the cloud, or it can be an on-premises SQL Server also. So what I have done is I have already created a on-premises SQL Server, which is sitting on my desktop here. Before you can use your on-premises SQL Server, you need to install something called as an integration runtime. So this integration runtime is basically what is nothing. It's nothing but your data management gateway, which was I called it as a version 1 of ADF. So this actually acts as a communication mechanism to transfer your data from your on-premises environment in a secure fashion to Azure. So I think you have to install this if your data store is going to be sitting in on-premises. So here I have already created integration runtime called Unisys Playpen IR. So this is what I will be using in order to do this. And similarly, I have got a database sitting here called my Playpen, and I have created a customer table with a list of all the columns I'm expecting to receive here. So if I just run here, I'll just make sure it doesn't have any data in it. Great. So it doesn't have any data currently. So let me go back to the demo. So I'll just close this window because it gives you a feel of what you need to do in order to do copy data, which I have already prepared as one of my pipeline here. So if you click on the pencil icon here, it shows all the pipelines that I have already created. And so this is my on-premises one, which is pretty much once I finish my wizard, this is what the pipeline that gets created. So my customers source and target data sets will be created. I haven't manually created anything here. I just followed through the wizard, and it created the data sets as well as the single pipeline, which will be the Playpen pipeline on premises for me. So now I can pretty much, if I want to run this pipeline, I can just get it running, and it will copy all the data from that particular customer's endpoint to my target table, which I mentioned, showed below. So I'll just run this in a debug mode. So as you say, like the pipeline is running. So once it is completed, it will just let me know the progress. So it auto refreshes every 20 seconds. Once it is completed, it will be coming. I can also try and do this here. So as you can see, it got populated. So now I have just built a simple, using a simple copy data wizard. I was able to take data from the cloud on from a web service or a OData endpoint or something, and I can populate my on-premises SQL Server database. So the only thing you need to remember is to install the integration runtime, and I can quickly show you how the integration runtime will look like once you install it. So if you look at here, so here is your integration runtime. So when we go back to the slides, I'll show you what are the different types of integration runtimes we have got. But pretty much this shows like the gateway is running here, and pretty much it establishes the connection between your on-premises SQL Server to your cloud service. And how the data transfers securely is through this mechanism, and you can stop and start the service whenever you need to. Great, let us get back to the slides. So this is the copy data functionality, which we saw. So the next thing we'll be looking at, which we looked at a demo also. So as I said, it is around the integration runtimes. So the integration runtime is pretty much is responsible for the data movement and the transformation activities along with the execution of SSIS packages. So with Azure Data Factory, especially with version 2, there are 3 types of integration runtimes. So you have your default, the Azure integration runtime, which allows you to move data between any cloud services. If your source is on the cloud and your destination is on the cloud, then pretty much the default integration runtime is sufficient enough, which gets installed as part of provisioning Azure Data Factory. So that leaves us with the other 2 options, which is the self-hosted integration runtime. And the next one is the Azure SSIS integration runtime. So the difference between self-hosted and Azure SSIS is, as the name implies, self-hosted will allow you to install an integration runtime like the one which we saw, which I installed on my desktop, that allowed me to move the data between on-premises and the cloud services. While the Azure SSIS, it's pretty much Azure SSIS integration runtime is used for executing your SSIS packages. So your packages can be hosted on the cloud, and the source and the destination doesn't matter whether it's sitting on premises or on the cloud. So that's something to keep in mind. The self-hosted is if you're not using SSIS, but you still want to do data movement and transformation between your on-premises and the cloud, then you will go down this self-hosted integration runtime. But if you're thinking about, I have an existing SSIS package and I have to put it on the cloud, and I want to just exchange data between either on-premises databases and cloud, or just totally only on cloud, then you will go and configure an Azure SSIS integration runtime. Okay, so the next thing is we are going to see a demonstration around how do we lift and shift an on-premise SSIS package and make it to run on the cloud. So in order to do that, as I mentioned, like what is the integration runtime we need to configure for this type of activity is basically the Azure SSIS integration runtime. So the provisioning of Azure SSIS integration runtime can be done in 2 ways. Either you can write a custom code or in PowerShell to provision that, or you can use the portal to use the to provision the Azure SSIS integration runtime. So I think until early January this year, the only option Microsoft had was using PowerShell. The reason for that is it's still in preview mode. I think post January 2018, now we have the ability to provision it using the portal itself. So let us quickly see how you can provision it through the portal. So I'm getting back to my Azure portal here. Okay, go to my edit, my pipelines. Let me close all these things. Great. So if I go back to my connections here, so as you can see, like I have got linked services. This shows all the linked services that got created. The one example that got created was my OData Northwind as part of my copy data, and also on-premises SQL Server. So there were a couple of other pipelines which I have already pre-built, and these are linked services related to that. But the one which we saw around copy data, these are the 2 like linked services that were showing the establishment of connection to my OData service and to my destination on-premises SQL. So getting back to integration runtimes. So as you can see here, I have got 3 integration runtimes here. So one is the Azure. So normally when you provision Azure Data Factory version 2, pretty much you will get the default integration runtime provisioned automatically. But these are the other 2 runtimes which I provisioned myself. One is the self-hosted, which is the one as you saw here, which is my integration runtime gateway. So this is the self-hosted one which I used for my copy data functionality. And the other one which I have created was the SSIS integration runtime. Unfortunately, I can't show how to provision an SSIS integration runtime in this webinar. The reason for that is it takes 20 minutes for the provisioning process to complete. But I'll just show you the steps, but I'm not actually going to create one here. So here is the integration runtime setup. So I want to do a lift and shift of my SSIS packages, hit on next. So then I have to provide a name, which is pretty much here I have given as Unisys Playpen SSIS integration runtime. You can choose the location. So the one thing to keep in mind is the integration runtime, it is good to be provisioned in the same location as where you are going to provision your SSIS DB. So let me explain that clearly. So what happens as part of provisioning integration runtime is, because it takes 20 minutes, so behind the scenes it should be doing something for 20 minutes. So what it does is, like, it provisions the SSIS DB, which is your SSIS catalog. So that needs to be provisioned. All the tables related to that and all the stored procedures and things related to that need to be provisioned. So, and that's the reason it took 20 minutes. And currently Microsoft are working in how do we reduce the time further in order to make it much more efficient. SSIS DB, as part of setting up this, you need to provide a SQL Server instance. So on your Azure, pretty much you need to have a SQL Server instance provisioned, so that you can provide that SQL Server name as part of provisioning the integration runtime, the SSIS one. And as I said, the rationale behind that is because it has to create the SSIS DB somewhere. And that's why it needs the SQL Server instance. So that's one of the important criteria. So where you create your integration runtime is dependent on where the SQL Server is being created. So if you select the East US as a location here, make sure your SQL Server instance is also sitting in the same location, because otherwise it will cause some performance issues, because your SSIS will be running in one place, but the catalog will be sitting in some other location. So once you choose your location here, you can specify your node size. I'm just picking a smaller one here to save the dollars for my personal Azure subscription. And once you have provided here, you can move on to the next step. And then, as I said here, this is where it will be asking for saying, give me your database server endpoint. What is the admin username and password? And pretty much after this, it starts to provision the integration runtime, and it will take 20 minutes for it to complete. But once it is complete, pretty much this is what you will be saying here, and it will show like it is running. And the good thing is it's available in Australia East for us here, so which is much more handy. Great. So that is the first step if you want to lift and shift your SSIS packages to the cloud. So you have to provision the integration runtime. And as I mentioned, so this is from the graphical user interface, how you can go and provision the integration runtime. Or otherwise, you can use this particular PowerShell script. So it is self-documented with a lot of commands. So pretty much you have to put your configuration values here in terms of what should be your runtime name, what is the SQL Server instance name, what is your subscription, what is your data factory name here. And once you provide all this same information what you saw on the wizard, pretty much this PowerShell script will also can automatically provision your integration runtime. So again, how long it will take? It will, irrespective of whether you use the graphical user interface or run PowerShell, the current time is around 20 minutes. That's what it takes to provision an integration runtime. Great. So once we have provisioned it, pretty much it is ready for us to focus on how do we lift and shift SSIS packages. So let me quickly show. This is the demo which we finished. Okay. So in order to lift and shift an SSIS package, as we said, we saw how to create a data factory. So you need to have a data factory created. Then the next step you need to follow is to create an Azure SSIS integration runtime, and which is pretty much provisioning process, which we saw. And then make sure the Azure integration runtime is running, and which we saw through the dashboard there. It's in green and it was showing us a status of running. And finally, the next step we need to do is around deploying your SSIS packages and scheduling the ADF loads. So before we can do that, we need to have an SSIS package created. So what I have got here is a simple Visual Studio. A solution contains a single package. And as you can see here, I have got a source and as well as a destination. And the source is basically sitting on the cloud as well as a destination sitting on the cloud. So if I go back and show you here what I mean by that. So this is my on-premises SQL Server instance, and this is my cloud SQL Server instance. And this is the instance I have used to provision the integration runtime, which in turn created my SSIS DB. And all the tables that you could see, if you are provisioning for on-premises, it's the same set of tables and everything. Great. So it got created. And also I have got my integration services catalog provisioned also. So I'm just showing it in different, it's the same instance, but I'm showing it in different views here. So then I have got a playpen source table, which is similarly the same customers table, and a playpen destination, the customers table. So as you can see here, in the previous example, I populated a customers table from the Northwind OData endpoint that populated my customers table in my on-premises environment. But now I have got two tables, which is customers under my source database and customers under my destination database. In the demo, what I'm planning to do is populate my source table using a OData service again. So this time, I'm going to pull the data from the OData endpoint, but I'm going to populate the database that is sitting on the cloud, so which is the playpen source. So in order to do that, I have already got a playpen pipeline cloud sitting there. So this is basically to copy the data from the OData service, but this time it is not going to populate my on-premises. Instead, it is going to populate my cloud database. So in order to get that going, I'll just make sure the source table is currently empty. If not, we can empty it. It's currently empty. So let us jump back to this and say, okay, run this one. So now the purpose of triggering this pipeline is to make sure that it populates the data from my OData endpoint to my cloud table. And this is just to show like pretty much I use the copy data again, and to show that how simple it is to quickly uh, create a pipeline to copy the data from any source to any particular destination. So I'm just waiting for this to succeed. As you can see, the status has succeeded. So now I can run this again. There you go. So here it has populated the same set of data again from the OData endpoint. Great. So the next thing I have to do is, now I have got a source customers data. Now I want to push the same customers data to my destination. And this, I want to do this through an SSIS package. And I will run this the SSIS package multiple times, because you can deploy the same SSIS package in multiple mechanisms. And let us see that. So before we jump on to that, let us confirm that the destination table is also empty. So let me quickly. Great. So this is my playpen destination. My customers table is pretty much empty. My playpen source, my customer table has got around 91 rows. So let us see how we can populate from source to destination using SSIS. So a simple package, as I mentioned, which takes data from my source, which is my playpen source, to my playpen's destination, which contains the same customer table. Great. So as usual, what you are going to do is you want to deploy this package. So let us look at the different deployment options ADF offers us first. Great. So if you want to deploy an SSIS package to ADF version 2 on the cloud, so there are multiple ways of doing that. You can use your integration services deployment wizard, so which is straight away from Visual Studio, you can do that. Or you can use your command line interface, which is your DTX-EXE, and or you can use your T-SQL scripts. So pretty much you can use the SSIS DB store procedures in order to do the package deployment. So we will see each of them and see like, and also we can see how we can execute it. Great, let me get back here. So here I want to just deploy my package. So I'll just hit into deploy. So this is my integration services deployment wizard. So hit on next. It just validates, and I want to just connect to my, because as you know, like the SSIS sitting on the cloud here. It's not sitting on my on-premises database. I'm going to hit on my cloud instance so that I can publish my packages onto the cloud SSIS DB. So I'll just use my SQL authentication. Quickly type my password, connect to the instance. Great. So it basically says like typical SSIS deployment. If you have already got the package deployed, then it will say there is a project already deployed with that name. I'm just going to say, okay, that doesn't matter, overwrite it, and just deploying it. So what is going to happen is, it's same way how you are deploying your on-premises SSIS package. This is going to be deployed into a SSIS DB that is hosted on the cloud. So I have already connected to my integration services catalog here. So here, my sample package. So this is the package I created, and you can see the sample packages is available here. So now, in order to execute this sample package, you can either use your right-click execute process. And before that, I will configure the path for this. Or what you can do is, there are multiple mechanisms how you can actually execute the packages. So let me quickly, great, it's all set. Great, let me run on execute. So what we are trying to do here is just running the package, which is actually got deployed on the cloud. So here I'm just clicking on OK. Okay, while that is coming, in the meantime, we can go back and look at our destination customers, whether information is getting populated. So it's still pending execution. Great. Still, what is happening here? Not sure whether any maintenance or something going on here, but normally it is pretty much normally usually used to be quick. So just while that is running, I'll try and execute it again. Great, it got populated. So here, actually, the execution has been succeeded. There you go. And the data got populated in my destination table. So this is one way, which is pretty much the SSIS DB is hosted on Azure. And I have just executed a normal package, how I use to execute from my on-premises SSIS DB, the same mechanism I have used here. So nothing else different. So other than this, before we try different other methods, I'll just truncate the table in the destination and also make sure it's empty. Great. So let us go back to our slides. So we saw how do we deploy using the integration services deployment wizard. We'll just go down and that. So from an execution perspective, there are multiple ways you can again execute it. The one way which we saw is around how do we use our SSMS. These other two options is like we can also use T-SQL scripts as well as command line, but I'm not going to go through the command line because pretty much that's not normally everyone is going to use. So we saw the SSMS one, but I will also show how can we use the T-SQL scripts. Great. So let me get into the execution demo here. Okay, now I have got a package, but the usual thing is normally we will just schedule the package as a SQL agent job. And this, you can do it in multiple ways. Either if you have, you decided to host your SSIS package on the cloud, which is on ADF, but you may think like, okay, I want to still manage the jobs on premises. Like I have already a SQL agent running on premises. Why can't I schedule the job to say like, okay, execute my cloud SSIS package, but through my on-premises SQL agent job? Is that possible? Yes, it is of course possible. So what you can do is you can go back to your on-premises SQL Server agent, and you can pretty much create a job that is going to invoke the packages sitting on ADF, which is on the cloud. So how do you do that? Because how do you establish the connection between your on-premises SQL agent to run a package that is sitting on ADF on the cloud? In order to do that, probably you have to configure something called as linked server. So I'll just quickly show you how can you set up a linked server. It is a set of 3 SQL statements that you need, T-SQL statements that you need to execute. The first one is around this. This is adding a link server. Here I'm just giving the name as Azure Link Server but what you can give here is your, instead of username, sorry, it should be server name here. So this is basically your database server that is sitting on the cloud. So when I said like, okay, provide a database server name in order to provision the integration runtime, because that is what is going to provision the SSIS DB. So that's the server name you have to give here. And then the catalog name, which is going to be SSIS DB. So if you run this T-SQL statement, pretty much it creates the link server called Azure Link Server. Once the Azure Link Server is created, then you need to provide the credentials that the link server can utilize in order to connect to the Azure ADF. And in order to do that, pretty much you have to provide your admin username and password. And this is something that you would have done as part of provisioning the server itself. So when you provisioned the SQL Server, you would have created an admin username and password. It's the same credentials that you'll be providing here. And once you do that, then pretty much you have to set up the link server options. This is going to give you the remote connectivity. So if you execute these 3 statements, pretty much a linked server will be created, and it will have enough permissions to connect it to your cloud SSIS DB catalog. Great, getting back to here. So that's what the first thing I have done here. So I have got a link server called Azure link server created by executing this, and also it has now got access to my SSIS catalog. So let me leave with that. And now I have created a new job called DPG lift and shift. If you look at the properties of this job, it has got nothing other than a single step. It says load my customer data. And what have I got here is basically a T-SQL statement. So if I can just copy and paste this so that you can see it on screen. Just zoom that. So here I have got 3 statements here. One is actually using the catalog store procedures. So I haven't done anything other than just executing the package using the catalog store procedures, which is typically this is out of the box as part of provisioning the catalog. These store procedures get provisioned. So this is a test series of T-SQL statements that I'll have configured here in my job, and pretty much that will execute the package, which is hosted on Azure. Great. So let us see how this works then. So let us make sure again it is empty. Great. Now we are going to run this job and to see whether the data is getting populated from my playpen source to my playpen destination. So while this is running, basically this is one way of doing it. One is actually we saw how we can execute the package directly by right click on the package and do execute. The other option we are looking at here is I have an on-premises SQL Server agent. I want to use my agent sitting on-premises, but my packages will be sitting on the cloud. Is there an ability I can invoke that from my on-premises agent? Yes, you can do that. And that's what the mechanism like we are seeing here. Well, this is still running. Let us query and see. It's not yet completed. Okay, while this is running, let us look at the third option which we wanted to see. So now instead of using either of these options, which is I don't want to run this manually and I don't want to use my on-premise SQL agent. What is the purpose of using an on-premise SQL agent while I can use the Azure Data Factory itself? Okay, great. It has completed. Let us quickly query this. Great, the data is available again. So before I go to the next demonstration, I'll pretty much clear the table again. Great, and query this again. Great, it's empty again. So the third option we are going to look at here is instead of, I have already moved my SSIS package hosting onto the cloud. I want to just do the scheduling part also on the cloud itself. I don't need to use my on-premises infrastructure for anything. So is that feasible? Of course, it's feasible with ADF v2. So what you have to do again is you have to create a pipeline. So as I said, pipeline is the fundamental component for the orchestration for ADF loads. So here I have got a playpen pipeline cloud. So this is just saying like, okay, I am just configuring this in the cloud. So in order to execute a SSIS package, pretty much you need to create a, sorry, this one it is playpen store procedure. That's the one you should be using. So in order to execute a SSIS package, basically you need a store procedure. So you can just need to drag and you create a new pipeline by clicking on here, pipeline. And then once you have got this window, pretty much you can drag and drop a store procedure like this. So let me remove this. I don't want this. So I have got an store procedure already created here. Let me click on my store procedure properties. So here I have got the name of my store procedure as load customer data. And I have just said like, okay, used my Azure link service, which I have created, or if you want to create service, you can create here. The one thing to keep in mind is what is the connection I'm making here is basically you are establishing the connection for your SSIS DB here. So whichever integration runtime that you have created, this is for establishing the connection on the cloud. So which is your integration runtime. This is not the SSIS one. That's something to keep in mind. And then in the store procedure, what you are giving here is just the calling the SP execute SQL store procedure. And the only parameter you need to pass is the statement. What is the statement I want to execute? And pretty much, if you remember, I had some series of T-SQL statements which I configured for the on-premises SQL agent job to say like, okay, execute this package. It's the same thing I have configured here. So here I have specified the same store procedures. I said executed, and then just tell me what is the status I'm getting. So if it is anything that is not equal to status 7, then my package execution has not succeeded. Otherwise, my package execution was succeeded. That's the only thing I have provided here. And once that's done, I don't think I haven't got anything else configured. So pretty much a store procedure component here and setting what is a statement that I need to execute as part of this execute SQL store procedure. And that's what it is. So now I can just hit on debug because it's quite easy for me to execute the pipeline. So it will trigger my pipeline, which in turn, as I said, when the pipeline executes, it just says it's running. And once it refreshes every 20 seconds, it gives me the progress. And then I can go back and check my destination table to see whether my customers have been populated. So in this example, what we are trying to do here is we create the job, which is as a pipeline on ADF itself. And once this job succeeds, then probably I can show you how you can trigger, like create a trigger for this pipeline, which is basically a scheduler. So let me wait for this to confirm to me that the status has been succeeded. Or the other way we can go and check here is, has my table got populated? Great, it got populated. Let us come back here because it refreshes, so it does an auto refresh. Let us see whether it is done. Great. While it's still running, that's why you can see here when until it auto refreshes, we can see the other option, which is around triggers. As I said, triggers are nothing but a scheduling process. So I have got the pipeline here, but I want to schedule this pipeline to run like every hour or something. So what I can do is I can go here and say like, okay, either trigger this pipeline now. Oh, okay, it says failed. Let me check why. User error, maybe I have been doing something, but I could see the data getting populated here, as you can see. Great. Maybe I was just not saving this or publishing this while it is in the edit mode itself. I was triggering that. That could be the reason too. Great. Coming back to the triggering option. So here you can either create a new trigger, which is basically a new schedule, or you can just say like, okay, I want to just do a test execution. I'll just hit on trigger now. So if you want to put it into a schedule, you can create a new trigger. So I have got some existing triggers here, which you can use. And great. So I can have got an existing trigger, which you can use here in terms of the schedule. So as I have said, like, okay, you can schedule your stuff here. Again, this shows in UTC here, but there is another way you can get into your trigger options. Let me get back into this tab, triggers. And as you can see here, I can create a new trigger option. And great, it still says UTC. And I think it will be changing because in the monitoring area, they have changed it more into the time zone. And I think I'm hoping like they will introduce the time zone in the scheduling part also, just to avoid the confusion. It's not hard, but I think you need to do the translation and remember that you are scheduling at a UTC time. Okay, so now you can set the schedule here, and pretty much the pipeline will be acting on that schedule. So to give you an example here, I have scheduled the playpen pipeline store procedure one. That pipeline uses this trigger, which means like every hour I can run this and my trigger is actually activated. So every hour I get the customer's data populated on my uh, table on Azure SQL database. So that's finally your trigger. And the important thing is also like you can schedule all these options, but you want the ability to monitor. So there are a couple of ways you can monitor your execution. So you can use SSMS as I showed before, like if you're using a SQL agent to trigger your jobs, probably you can use all your SSIS built-in dashboards. Or if you're using the ADF portal, pretty much what you can see is can jump on to monitoring. So I'm just discarding my changes here. So here it will show to me like, okay, all the things that has been changed. And this is here, they have introduced a time zone, which is really handy because trying to look at your monitoring on a UTC time zone, sometimes it's confusing. I'm hoping they will just introduce the same thing in the scheduling side also, just to avoid some confusion. So as typical, you can rerun a particular load, or you can see what is the success, whether it has been successful or not, or you can also apply some filters. So now it shows me I had a filter already, but it now shows me all the information around when I loaded them and whether it is successful or not. Great. Let me get back to my slides. So we saw the monitoring as well as we saw the scheduling method. We saw the way how you can use your SQL Server agent. We saw the way how you can use your store procedure activity on Azure Data Factory to schedule it. I'm not going to take you through the Elastic jobs today, but it will be something that I will cover in a future webinar because Elastic job itself is a separate topic that needs to be covered in detail. Great. So here are some of the references, as I mentioned, like so you can just go and play with these, look at these references, and pretty much it allows you to start working on ADF version 2. So I have some URLs which relates to ADF version 2 as well as version 1. The key thing to remember is if any URL talks about SSIS with ADF, then pretty much it's a ADF v2 feature. Great. In summary, so Azure Data Factory version 2, it has got more features than V1, and Microsoft has addressed some pain points we had in V1, typically that has been addressed in V2 preview itself, which I could see. And hopefully before it becomes a public release, there will be a lot of other features will be incorporated. And lift and shift SSIS to Azure, this is going to be a big boost for companies, as I mentioned. It's quite easy. You don't need to do anything other than taking your SSIS packages and putting it on the cloud. And pretty much you can start utilizing a platform as a service model. And this is where I think I can see the opportunity for large organizations trying to utilize this, which shows them like they are onto the cloud even from an ETL perspective. Great. So before I take any questions, I'll hand over to Manu again, and probably then I can just take the questions after that. Over to you, Manu.
Thanks, Anu. That was a wonderful session. I'd like to quickly cover a few slides. Meanwhile, all the attendees can pose their questions in the Q&A panel. So there are training days, as I've mentioned before, at the Data Platform Summit happening on 7th and 8th of August. So we have Troubleshoot and Optimize for SQL Server Like a Pro by Dmitry Kotkovich. He's a Microsoft Certified Master from US. Sunil Agarwal is doing how to migrate your on-premise database to Azure SQL DB and managed instance. I'm sorry, I'm not sharing my screen.
Yeah, I was about to say
All right.
that.
Thanks, Annie. That was Dimitri and Sunil Agarwal. As I was telling that he'll be doing a full day training on how to migrate your on-premise database to Azure SQL DB and managed instance. Managed instance is currently in public review, and there was a session by Tejas 2 days back. You can go and look at the webinar recording, but also a full day training will give you more insights on how to migrate your databases. Power BI from Rookie to Rockstar by the BI expert from New Zealand, Reza Raed. Dr. Leila Itati, data scientist, again an MVP from New Zealand, is doing two pre-cons. The first one is on leading edge data science with Microsoft tools. World-renowned SSIS expert, Andy Leonard, he's doing a full day pre-con on a day of intelligent data integration with SSIS and Azure Data Factory. There'll be a lot more covered. There's pretty much most of it covered by Anu today, but this will be a full day training where Andy will be talking more about how you can build it by using SSIS as well as Azure Data Factory. Madan Gajendran and his team, the Cosmos DB team, is doing a full day workshop on Cosmos DB. The second pre-con by Dr. Leila Itati is building intelligence applications using the Microsoft AI platform. If you're really serious about learning R, this is a session for you by Steph Lockie, a world-renowned R expert. She's doing a practical R for everyone. Sanjay Mishra and his team, the DataCat team from Microsoft, will be doing a full day training on building a scalable data architecture in Azure. Joey D'Antoni and Denny Sherry are coming back this year again. They have been popular speakers and supporters of Data Platform Summit since year one. So Joey is doing a session on Linux for the SQL Server DBA. Peter Myers, who has been a very popular speaker last year, is doing a full day training on Azure Zero to Analysis Services. Denny, as I've said before, he's doing a pre-con on high availability and disaster recovery. You can look at more information at dps10.com, but if you need more information, if you want help talking to your company or your manager, please drop us a mail at contact@dps10.com, and you can also reach us directly on the phone numbers mentioned here. And I'll hand over to Anu, who can quickly take the questions.
Great. Thanks, Manohar, and thanks for giving me the opportunity, first of all, and thanks for the data platform gigs. And for all the participants, I would highly recommend you guys to register for the Data Platform Summit. And I'm planning to be over there to attend the summit this year and to speak over there. And I think it is good always to increase your personal knowledge and these type of conferences, and especially the pre-cons. So even though Manu said like I have covered a bit in around the ADF, but it's still worthwhile. There is lots more internals in there to learn. So I have just briefly gave you an idea around ADF version 1 and version 2, but I think there is a lot more to learn. So I would highly recommend to you guys to attend the training and learn a lot from that. So let me quickly look into the Q&A. Aravind has asked the question around any timeline we are aware when the preview would be made available as an offering. I don't have an idea yet, and I have been waiting for that to come from Microsoft. Hopefully before DPS, I think it will be there. Fingers crossed. Sandeep's question, I'm very much new to Azure, so we need to create a service which can to Azure. After configuring, we can run the service to data related actions, right? Yes, you can. So if I understand this question correctly, you are planning to create a service which will contain all the CRUD operations like create, update, delete, etc. So you can easily configure using the ADF. I think it's more from a data related actions in terms of loading the data. So you need to think about this as an ATL replica, ADFS. So if you're thinking about removing data and other endpoints, then I think not for updates, I wouldn't recommend, but more for, yes, you can truncate the data and insert the data. Yes, definitely you can do that through the web service, and I would recommend doing that if you have endpoints like that, which we are currently done with ADF version 1 itself for a client here. So we are loading data from their on-premises to Azure. And yes, will ADF will replace SSIS? I don't think so, because I think it's going to be complementary In my session, a lot of organizations have invested in SSIS development. So it's not going to be easy for them to rewrite all those packages into ADF. And that's the reason I think SSIS is still there, but they have given the ability to lift and shift your packages and run it on Azure. I could see a lot of organizations will adopt it, which is using the cloud infrastructure to run the SSIS packages, but I can't see SSIS disappearing sooner. Great. I don't have any other questions, but one more question coming through.
No, that's all I know. I think
Is it
there's
okay?
one in the chat window. It says
That's
package
fine.
will if SIS package will if destination and source schema is different.
So is that question around whether it will fail or? So what as part of, if you are using copy data, probably you can see your source schema as well as the destination schema, and you can do the mapping also on the fly. So because I had a one-to-one mapping already, and that's the reason I was showing it. But if you want to do transformations also, you can invoke a store procedure and you can do that. So that mapping, it can be different, and you can do the transformation and keep them the same. So that's doable on ADF.
All right. Thanks, Anu. Thanks for taking the questions and thanks for the wonderful webinar today. Thank
Great.
you everyone for taking your time on holiday and attending the webinar. And everyone have a very good Easter break.
Great, thanks, Manu. And any more questions, feel free to reach me through my channels like LinkedIn or Twitter. And thanks for giving the opportunity for Data Platform Geeks too.
Thanks for reminding that, Anu. Please do post your questions on our Facebook and LinkedIn group. We'll try to answer the questions there. You can also reach directly to Anu. Yeah. Thank you.